We are here today for the first in a series of discussions under the heading of Opening Up, talking to key members of Hilson Moran's team. Today, I am talking to Tom Reade, Associate Environmental Consultant at the company, and we're here to discuss air quality. I'm sitting here in my flat in southeast London, and I'm on a hill. There's a park at the top of the hill, and I distinctly remember getting towards the end of March, taking a walk up the hill in the 1 hour of daily allowed exercise, and looking out across towards Canary Wharf and also the City of London, and thinking that I'd never seen it look so clear. It's just that the view was something that I'd never had before, and I'm sure that must be down to air quality. Was it the same for you in Manchester?
Absolutely. Yes, the streets were empty, very little cars. And to be honest, there was very few people walking around the city centre. A lot of people obviously live out in the suburbs up in the north, because it's a lot easier and a lot shorter to get into the city centre. So the parks, which I similar to you, I live a facing one. It was busy for most of the day, with people taking their 1 hour exercise. And yeah, in terms of the air quality side of things, I did a few site visits as well during lockdown, because there was some construction sites and things that were still operational. One particular down in London, which I went to visit, and driving through London has never been so easy. There was next to no vehicles on the road. It was remarkable actually to see the absolute change that obviously a pandemic can have on people using their personal vehicles to travel around for work, and also just travelling in and out of the city centre.
Yeah, and obviously air quality is something you specialise in and something that you would notice. But do you think that people in general notice the difference in terms of the quality of the air they were breathing?
To the layperson, maybe not. Maybe to those that have existing health conditions which are exacerbated by air quality. In those that live along busy streets, busy roads, maybe they would have noticed a difference more so. But people that are out in the suburbs, I would have said they probably wouldn't notice as much, if I'm honest.
Do you think that's an issue then going forward? Because it would be nice to think that we don't go back entirely to the levels of pollution that we had in our cities prior to the pandemic.
Yes, so that would be the ideal, if we can take this opportunity, if that's what we'd like to call it, of reduced road traffic and those sorts of things. Ultimately, people want to live in the city. They want that, that city life dream, where they've got everything on their doorstep, from restaurants to bars to employment. I think more and more people are choosing to move out of the cities because of the air quality issue and the number of people it affects on a yearly basis. But it is an opportunity that we know we can achieve with some substantial changes to policy and legislation to drive that change towards a potentially an all-electric vehicle future, and even increasing public transport and that connectivity in urban environments to encourage less vehicles on the road and subsequently potentially lower pollution as well.
But what evidence do you see that government, either central or local, is heading in that direction? So
when the back end of last year, the government did release a document investing around $2 billion in public cycling, public walking. For example, up in Manchester, there's a main arterial route that leads from the south of Manchester into the city centre. They closed, it's a 4-lane road, and they closed 2 of the lanes to vehicles and effectively made it a cycle highway directly into the city to encourage people to uptake on cycling, because obviously cycling was one of the biggest things that people chose to do during lockdown. Myself, I tried to buy a bike, couldn't get hold of a bike anywhere, just because demand is so high for that type of thing.
I had a similar issue with buying a games console for my son.
Priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a reasonable chance that the courts could have quite an influence in this space as well. There was the horrible case of Ella Kissy-Deborah in South London. It's going back a long way. She died in 2013, but just in December, the courts ruled that the pollution had been a contributing factor to her death, and I believe she was actually the first person in the country that was the case for. And it feels like actually the courts and the judicial system might actually be driving policy in this way, in addition to whatever government might be doing. Is that something you see as having real potential?
Absolutely. I think, as you say, it was the first case in the UK where air pollution was on the death certificate as a cause of death. There is a lot of political willpower to encourage and enforce improved solutions to manage air quality. However, like with all all parliamentary acts, for the environmental bill, for example, it starts off with the highest of aspirations and ultimately gets watered down to what is achievable in the timescales. Or when I say achievable, what they think they can achieve in the timescales. So I do think that there needs to be a stronger influence from the judicial side of things to maintain and improve air quality, and also to ensure that the government is kept on track and kept accountable to its promises that it's made in that respect.
Yeah, and I suppose that weaves in with the commitments that the country's made and what been put on the statute book in terms of the Paris Agreement and challenges to get to net zero by 2050.
Absolutely, they're all interlinked. Net zero, air quality, climate change, they're all interlinked. Having net zero in typical terms for things like buildings and road transport, you're talking around the electrification side of things, which ultimately does have a knock-on effect to tailpipe emissions in buildings, or your gas boilers and so forth at home, or your transition to electrical vehicles where you're taking the tailpipe emissions off the road.
I saw a poll in, I think it was The Guardian a couple of days ago, which was saying that 30% of people expect to buy an electric car within a reasonable time period. I think it was 5 years. I mean, that seemed quite encouraging to me. I have to admit that it was surprising to me that it was quite that high, especially given how expensive they still are. What do you feel about that?
I personally, I would, if I could afford to buy an electric car now, I would do. I have a hybrid. That's my interim step at the moment. Like I say, they are expensive, and there needs to be a government incentive to do that. And I think the change is only going to continue to drive forward in terms of that transition towards electric vehicles. But obviously, alongside that, we need to be thinking around how we're going to charge those vehicles. A lot of homes are not necessarily set up for that charging facility. There's not necessarily enough charging points in the right locations. There was an article the other day actually around EV charging hotspots and places, quite wealthy council boroughs, of places like Kensington and Chelsea. They have a huge amount of electric vehicle charging points, and they've invested well. But if you look at sort of the location of those, they are in an affluent location. But there needs to be more around the planning system to incorporate, EV charging points in residential and commercial spaces, offices, town centre redevelopment, and the whole works. So it is, yes, there needs to be that uptake in vehicles through an incentivization scheme. But also we need to be thinking about how we strategically locate charging points to make them accessible for people on the day-to-day, because not everybody, like you say, at home has a driveway. A lot of people on street park and things like that. So there needs to be ways around that need to be brought forward as well.
Yeah. And when it comes to domestic properties, what's the single biggest thing you think that we could do to improve our air quality? Are we talking about replacing gas boilers, or is it about insulation? What is it?
Again, I think it's a combination of a lot of things. So we need to be looking at converting gas boilers to alternatives, whether that be hydrogen, combination of hydrogen gas boilers. I know from 2025 there was an article and a publication released yesterday saying that any gas boiler that is sold from 2025 onwards worldwide should be compatible with hydrogen. So there's that. Obviously in the UK we have slightly stricter or have a slightly more stricter approach on that, where anything that's built new from 2024, I believe, doesn't have a gas boiler within it. So in that sense, we're looking at things like air source heat pumps, or potentially battery or photovoltaics on the roof.
Sure. But again, that's going to need some sort of subsidy, presumably, to actually roll it out, because, we can bring in very stringent laws on new build, properties, but that is a tiny percentage of actually the nation's stock. So we're going to need some sort of very serious program in order to bring existing stock up to standards, right?
Absolutely. It's funny you should mention incentivization programs. There was obviously the green government incentive for for things like insulating your house, changing of windows to make them more airtight and things like that. That was available to homeowners in the existing stock. That was actually revoked and removed a couple of weeks back. Right. So if we're talking about incentivizing people to have use less energy within their homes, and obviously that pivotal grant scheme has been removed early.
Given the billions and billions that the pandemic has cost the country, and for all that the Build Back Better slogan has been bandied around, I mean, it's difficult to see where that money's going to come from, right?
It is. Like you say, we're 300 billion plus in a hole from COVID of what we've borrowed, I believe, something around that sort of marker. So that's a substantial amount of money to have to pay back, which is going to be paid back over tens of years. It's not going to be something we pay back immediately, but we still need to manage our other investment as well as a country. We're going to have to find ways of generating this cash and incentivizing even the biggest of investment firms in the city to invest in green infrastructure, and look at their ethics and their sustainable goals, and actually all the people that are investing in these companies and why things should be looking at the green credentials and making sure the money that are investing is invested in the right space to really help operational energy, air quality, climate change, that target towards net zero.
Yeah, and that kind of provides a neat bridge actually across to the commercial property space, because in my experience in the last, predating COVID actually, a lot of the big investment firms are increasingly interested in their ESG, their environmental, social and governance strategies, and do seem to be, if not disinvesting, then certainly avoiding investing in properties that don't come up to scratch when it comes to the environment. I mean, that seems to me to be a real push factor. Are you hopeful on that front?
I am, yes. I think we're seeing a lot of the existing stock and the existing clients that we work with. They're looking at the moment on the repurposing side of things and refurbishing, refitting, rather than new construction, which is positive. I think it's going to be very much employee led. I think going forward, employees are going to want to feel that they're in a safe environment, to come to work, and obviously starting from the employees through into the corporate companies, the developers, into the investors. That it's a chain which is going to be fed from the bottom upwards and the top down as well. So I think it's important that investment is in the right space. And as we're seeing at Hilson Moran, developers are increasingly looking at green credentials for buildings.
I think that's a really interesting concept. So you've got the investors, we've got the real power, we've got the real money. They're pushing in the right direction, and you've got the workers, possibly even the younger generations, who, frankly, climate change is going to affect them in a very serious manner unless we get on top of this. So it really is coming at it from both ends of a spectrum, and that's absolutely fascinating and encouraging.
Absolutely. And I think that is key to driving forward the green agenda in buildings. Everyone wants to see a healthy building, don't they? And healthy building is a concept which has been around for a while, but I think it's becoming more to the forefront now. And healthy buildings concept is, it's not just around air quality; it's around the whole internal environment of a building. And as I said, employees want to work in the safest, the cleanest environments that they can do. Investors want to ultimately make their investment worthwhile. And there's evidence to show, and there's been a lot of research around, rent yields and things like that in healthy buildings. And they're typically fetching around 8 to 10% higher than a non-healthy building. So the importance factor of a green building and that healthy environment inside is beneficial to all, both through from the employee, through to the developer or the landowner, all the way through to the investor as well.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. That's been an absolutely fascinating chat. Really enjoyed it. Hopefully next time we do this, we can do it face to face in the same room.
Absolutely. Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Take care, Tom. All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.